Hi, everyone. We're going to give it just a couple of moments before we get started to let some other folks join. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you here today. I'm Kelly, and I'm a member of our community and elementary distance learning teams here at Guidepost. And I also happen to be a former Montessori elementary teacher. I also attended a Montessori school myself through age 12, so I'm particularly excited about this topic. I first want to go over just my sort of standard housekeeping items, which is that we'll be recording this webinar just so that you're aware of it. And it will be later posted within our elementary family framework, which you'll hear a bit more about later, I'm sure. If you have questions as Peter is talking, and I'll introduce him in just a moment, if you'll please write them in the questions tab that's in the panel, and I'll relay them to Peter during the Q&A portion. So we look forward to your questions, and we'll leave plenty of time for that at the end. But I would love to go ahead and test that out so you can sort of orient yourself to where that is. So if you could let us know where you are joining from, and I will share a few of those out once I hear from you. So it looks like we have Amy from Seattle.
Hi, Amy.
Who else? We have a quiet group today. Can everyone find the questions panel? We have Susan from Toronto. Welcome, Susan. We've got Hollywood, San Diego, some Washington folks, Pennsylvania, Charlotte. So we have good representation from across the country.
Great.
Well, Peter had asked me if we could ask a question in advance just to sort of collect some input, and then we can revisit it throughout the webinar, which is sort of what are your pain points? Meaning, what has been the most challenging part of supporting your elementary child in learning at home? Whether this is new to you or your child is perhaps doing a distance learning program, at school with their regular teacher, or maybe you're a veteran homeschooler. I know we have all sorts of folks on the call. But if you'd go ahead and let us know that, and then we can circle back and kind of see what themes there are, that would be really helpful. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Peter, Peter Piché, who will be sharing lots of gems with us today. Peter is a trained Montessori guide, a Montessori term that we use for teachers at multiple levels, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, and 12 to 18. He's got 17 years of classroom experience, and he's also a Montessori father of 2. So at Higher Ground and Guidepost, he's a theory trainer and a coach for guides. And he's particularly involved with the development of our programs at the Academy of Thought and Industry, known as ATI, which is Higher Ground's middle and high school program. And as if that wasn't enough, Peter is also a certified life and leadership coach. So basically, you can ask him anything. But I'm going to turn it over to you now, Peter. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm pretty excited today to introduce this topic around motivation. Often I think that we use the term, I'm going to motivate you, right? Or we think of motivating other people. And I always think that motivation is something that actually comes from within. That's my idea, that our motives are inside of us. And perhaps the most significant thing we can do as parents or educators or caregivers of any kind is to realize that that kind of motivation that we're seeking is something we're seeking to spark, aren't we? So welcome to this webinar on motivating and motivation of your elementary child. So we're going to introduce you today to some ideas about how you can connect your child to purposeful work that helps them feel like they're taking initiative. And we'll give you some tips for delivering lessons that encourage exploration and then provide even more opportunities to carry that work that you introduce forward. And we'll talk about how you can watch your child for cues about how to tap into what they're showing you about their own interests. And then we'll finish up with questions and suggestions for continuous engagement and give you a few ways that you can start, and then we'll go from there. I hope that all sounds good. So we're going to introduce you to some principles first. And for each principle, we'll discuss how to make that come to life. The very first principle I want to talk about is this idea of connecting our children to authentic purposes. Just like grown-ups, children often reach a calm, highly focused state when they find a purpose toward which they can direct their energy. So, though we're all familiar with worksheets, and those can keep your child occupied for a short time, and often even provide helpful practice for a skill, they're unlikely in the end to inspire. They very rarely encourage deeper thinking, and they tend not to foster love of learning. Memorizing content and practicing a skill that you don't understand can be a little bit demotivating and boring when you only have a worksheet at your disposal. Now, worksheets as repetition of a skill may have their place for sure, but consider when you introduce a new concept, whether it be adding fractions or identifying adverbs, which are two examples we'll talk about, that you help your child work with it in a really active way so that they can explore and then understand and retain the material for themselves. So the question becomes, how do we do it? How do we create purposeful work for children? Because it's one thing to say it, right? And then it's another thing to actually do it. Well, here's some examples and some suggestions. In Montessori classrooms, and I just quickly made these from materials I had on hand this morning. Fractions are represented by circles that are divided into equal parts. And so it's obvious that adding a fourth or a quarter to a third requires a new way of thinking, right? Because the children can see for themselves that one of these plus one of these isn't two of anything that we know the names of, because the names of these are different. So through some suggestion and discovery, they learn that the pieces have to have common names in order to be able to speak the result when you put them together. In this case, they see that the fractions need to be further divided or cut into equal pieces to add together and get that result of 7/12, which is what we would have. And fractions are a hard thing to memorize. We all have this memory, likely, of a time in our lives when we were taught a procedure to make that work, but we didn't necessarily understand it. And it's better if we can conceptually put that together so that our young people can really know what a fraction is and how to work with them. We also mentioned in the last slide the adverbs. So to help you understand adverbs further, you can turn that lesson into a role-playing game instead of just a worksheet adding ly to words. You could have your child walk across the room in a role play cautiously, for example, or angrily, or quickly. And then, of course, we can't leave out joyfully, right? These are all small and concrete ways to make lessons come alive instead of just being delivered from a sheet of paper. Okay, our next principle, planting seeds. Now, I know we all remember those lists of dry, disconnected facts that we all memorized and usually promptly forgot in history classes, let's say. It's important that we realize that information is always more meaningful and memorable when they're shared in a story form. So consider making like a ritual out of introducing fascinating people and places and times in history, even facts about amazing plants and animals and scientific phenomena. You can make it a habit for yourself, even at meals where you're all sitting together. Make it an expectation that you can ask a question. What's one interesting thing you learned about a person or a place or a time in history today? And then make sure you are prepared yourself to share as well so that it's a shared experience. I know we're all wary of more screen time these days, and we should be, but a colleague told me today that she uses this RSA Shorts, a video animation series on YouTube, to stimulate conversations with her child about big ideas and inspirations. Other options are to make rituals out of just reading together, out of a collection like a book that I have on my shelf, The Unusual Book of Knowledge. I actually think I have it right here. And that's bound to get a child in your life wondering and engaged. Now, Maria Montessori, we talked about Dr. Montessori at the beginning of this. She had a lot of things to say about this idea of planting seeds. For instance, interest will no longer be there if the seed be sown too late, but at 6 years of age, all items of culture are received enthusiastically, and later these seeds will expand and grow. So right here, she's alluding to the idea that we shouldn't underestimate the child's ability to be given a great many things that spark their imagination at this age, and not be so worried that they won't grow into things even later that we couldn't have surmised would happen. She also says the secret of good teaching is to regard the child's intelligence as a fertile field in which seeds may be sown, to grow under the heat of flaming imagination. She's very dramatic here. She knows that the child's imagination in the elementary years is really alive, and that our job is to feed it, feed it, feed it, and then watch it and let it go. And finally, let's see if I can get at this one. To give the whole of modern culture has become an impossibility, and so a need arises for a special method whereby all factors of culture may be introduced to the 6-year-old, not in syllabus to be imposed on him, or with exactitude of detail, but in the broadcasting of the maximum number of seeds of interest. Maximum number of seeds of interest. These will be held lightly in the mind, she says, but will be capable of later germination as the will becomes more directive, and thus he may become an individual suited to these expansive times. She's really talking about the child beginning at age 6 and 7, really at age 7. She's often said that if you were to visit from another planet, you might regard the elementary child as the adults of the species, because they tend to be so full of wonder about the world and wondering all of how things work. And it's at that time when we give these things to children that later on she refers to this idea that the individual emerges who's suited to these times that we're in. So what are we really getting at here? What's our goal? Well, our job is to strike the imagination. It's to get children curious, of course, and wanting to explore more, especially on their own. So we aim to get them started, but we also invest time in this. We tell stories or even read them. And we do this in a way that gets them to learn about artists, leaders, and inventors and change makers from the past and present, as well as facts and information. Now, when you're telling a story to your child, don't feel like you have to share every last detail or even get it all right. Enthusiasm is the best vehicle. If you tell just brief stories that spark curiosity and leave room for your child to explore, that's the key. And even consider ending the story with, there's a lot more to learn about this. I wonder what else you can discover. In fact, consider leaving them hanging with that age-old device of a cliffhanger. You don't even need to finish a story, but to get to a really high point and say, and we'll leave the rest for another time, really gets a child interested in wanting to know more. Of course, elementary children love hearing stories about real people. So share historical stories from your own life. These things promote intimacy with one another and knowing each other more deeply, and your child hungers to know about you and your life. I just had a conversation with my own father last week who told me about a time his mother asked him as an elementary age student to go out, and he was part of a 15-child family, to go out and with a butcher knife kill the chicken for the family dinner. He just couldn't do it. And that story actually, even though I'm older now and heard it from my father, brought me closer to him. So just remember that all the stories you have inside of you are in fact worthy to tell as well. We can create stories that we share back to the child's own life and how we live. Past heroic figures and scientific discoveries have a lasting impact on children. Why? Because they see with gratitude how their own lives are better as a result. So even telling stories about things that they presently use in their lives all the time, that are origin stories about how those things came to be, can really spark a child's interest. And of course, think big. We talked about the imagination that's alive in the elementary child. Elementary children have such vivid imaginations. They love to explore faraway places. We can take a trip to Saturn, especially in our mind. We can go to ancient civilizations like Egypt and look at the pyramids and see how they were built and see what hieroglyphs were made and what they mean. And of course, we can traverse the history of global events like the Ice Age. Another principle is this idea of tapping into interests. So perhaps you've had some successes at connecting your child more readily to work with a purpose, and you've been able to tell and read some stories, you've planted some seeds. One layer deeper is to discover what truly captivates your child and then offer more of that. Pay attention to what the next lesson in a sequence might be after you've given one, and offer some suggestions for how they could follow up. You might connect them to a particular passion of theirs. How to do that? Listen to the questions that your child asks of you and notice what she's excited about. Help her explore some more ways to learn, to go deeper and connect with others, both peers and experts who share her interests. My significant other's daughter was so passionate about wanting pet cats that her daughter did all this research on cats and their superiority as pets. And her mother suggested that she create a feature-length PowerPoint to present it to her to convince her and to position herself as a future cat owner. She actually completed all the research and the PowerPoint and then scheduled a time with her mother to present it so that she could make her pitch. Now, in this case, it actually worked, and now they're the proud owners of 2 new cats. Now, I'm not recommending that you give in to every request your child makes just because they're passionate and produced research and a PowerPoint, but this example goes to the heart of letting a child fully explore their passions, and who knows where it might lead. So yes, we need to leverage these strengths and passions. When your child is spending time doing things he loves, he's building skills and confidence to tackle the things that he finds more challenging. Interests are both the keys to engagement and ways to inspire your child to revisit these areas where he may not be as inclined. So try incorporating these interests and strengths into passions that the child finds more challenging or feels more resistant to doing. For example, you might have an artsy child who tends to avoid math, maybe. In that case, invite him to illustrate a word problem, to draw it out. Demonstrate maybe how to create a beautiful geometric design using polygons, and then use them as a jumping off point to learn about perimeter or area or just the parts of these figures. Encourage your child to find the link that excites him and then ask, how would you like to practice this? And of course, any chance that you can get to link to a passion for something real and that contributes to your household is great. Because in the end, even young people at ages 6 to 12, they want to be important and significant in your home. My nephew is in 5th grade, and my sister just sent me a video of him on the riding lawnmower. He wants to be a farmer when he grows up, so he's already practicing his skills with big machinery, and he feels proud to be contributing this need in his household in a significant way. The next principle, allowing time. Maybe it's just me, but I've labeled this time that we're all in a great pause. And it's important to recognize that time given is a real gift. So how do we do that in the context of motivation, right? Well, once your child has found work that energizes them, it's okay to step back and allow them to work for as long as they like, which may be several minutes, but maybe even several hours. There really isn't a need to interrupt unless it's absolutely necessary or to impose a schedule that might be more arbitrary on them. We can create schedules, and we definitely should, so that when we need them, we can fall back on them. But we also need to give freedom to fully engage in a cycle of work until our child feels complete with it. Think of your own workday, for example. It's probably the case that interruptions and transitions affect your concentration and your willingness, and even your problem-solving skills and creativity. And your child is the same. So if you see your child as deeply engaged, it's okay to give them space and time without any interruptions. So what are we aiming to create when we give that kind of space and time? Well, we're looking for and nurturing this mental state of flow when it happens. This is the state in which your child is deeply immersed in a project or activity and is enjoying the feeling of being focused and productive. In the end, this may mean tackling fewer subject areas, but this kind of engagement inspires a long-term love of learning and cultivates perseverance and builds your child's ability to tackle bigger projects and more challenging work. So while schedules and plans of work are useful so that in the absence of engagement, there's an opportunity for where to proceed next. In Montessori education, we say that we make a plan in order to possibly break that plan, especially if our minds and hands have been captured by an idea. A child's character, rest assured, is more readily built first through choosing work and then persisting and developing patience through being deeply immersed in its completion. Schedules and plans of work can help with that, but deep engagement and time to work until satisfied is the most valuable agent of character building. And the principle of making space. Just like we as adults need designated space to work and to spread out, your child does too. Everyone is happier when their spaces are defined and there's some sovereignty or at least some temporary ownership of that workspace so that a complete cycle of work can be achieved. Sometimes that can turn into a project that can remain in flux over the course of many days. And having defined spaces where a child is assured that their work will be protected and be available for them to go back to is really crucial if you can manage it. Of course, it could be a desk, it could be a table, it could be the corner of a room, a rug, or even a towel on the floor, but some place that's clearly defined and that they can identify as their space to put things. And why is that? You can see this proud young lady in the bottom corner of your screen, because eventually the need for big work is going to show up. Elementary children seem to have a drive for work that's creative and open-ended if they're allowed to actually pursue those creative energies when space is opened up for it to occur. They're curious and they want to know the way that the world works. They do. They not only want to read about things, but be able to explore how things work, make models, and nurture their imaginations. In this way, their reading, their writing, their research, and building skills are put to work. And having the space to make those explorations is really crucial. And then having a way to showcase them in, let's say, some sort of performance of understanding is a formal way and valuable too for them. So be sure to schedule those. Another principle is and perhaps the best one that we can offer to you is this idea around choice. The most powerful tool for engagement is, of course, offering choices and then supporting the direction of those choices by demonstrating the skills, those foundational skills to bring their interest in that work to life. We need to show our children how to go beyond worksheets, rote memorization, and traditional types of assignments. Close-ended adult-directed assignments can sap creativity and cap effort. So instead, after a story about a scientist's discovery, your child could draw a portrait and write a few key facts on the side, or create a timeline of that person's life with illustrations or events, or recreate the scientist's experiment, or even a similar experiment to the one that was mentioned. At first, my suggestion is to offer a choice between just two open-ended possibilities. Would you like to draw a portrait and write a few key facts, or create a timeline with illustrations? Introducing specific follow-up ideas one by one and offering more and more options until your child begins to come up with ideas of their own. And you can always ask, what ideas do you have about exploring this further? Always honor if a child has an idea for their own way to follow up an initial lesson or activity. The power of choosing can't be underestimated from the spell that it weaves on total engagement. The goal
Hey, Peter, I think you were muted.
Yeah, when did I get muted?
Just for a moment, maybe just start. I think it said the goal was the last we heard.
It was options?
Yeah, we're on options.
Okay. So of course, each type of follow-up work that you offer as an option needs to be modeled in detail and broken down step by step. Children are best served when we give them the tools that will allow them to be successful. Show how to make a poster, for example, how to use a ruler, how to make those bubble letters, how to space pictures and text, and then your child can make a poster after any lesson. Show them how to write a question, do some research, write an answer, and then your child can do a mini research project after any lesson on history, zoology, or geography. If we give them high quality examples of the foundational skills that are needed to achieve their aims, then they'll practice them. So to finish today, I have a couple of takeaways for you to start you off, and just three, so that you have limited options and choice to get started, since that's what we're modeling. The first thing that I'm suggesting for today is perhaps you could use one type of paper that could represent the constant, since keep the type of paper the same, and with your child, suggest that either they or you together build 3 different paper airplanes, which would represent the independent variable, and then test to see how far they fly, which we can name the dependent variable. Depending on the best design will probably determine how far they fly. The second option I'm suggesting for you today is, especially in the history we're living through, this idea of interviewing older family members about an historical event that they experienced, or even one that you've experienced yourself. And the third option that I'm suggesting as a takeaway for today that is usually a winner is this idea of creating a board game or a trivia game to about any area of interest that your child is set on. So that is our presentation on building motivation in your elementary child. We will take some questions, and also wanted to talk about where to go to get more information. So Kelly, back to you.
All right. Well, as far as more information, if you are not yet a member of our elementary family framework, we suggest that you join it. You can do so, it's completely free, by going to elearning.guidepost.home.ed. purposefulwork.com. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page and click Elementary Family Framework, and I think it just asks for your name and email, you can get access to all sorts of great resources, including ones on this topic and many others. If you are not a Guidepost family, you may also be interested in our Guidepost Elementary album. If you're one of our enrolled families, you already have full access to this, but I'll be sending a follow-up email to our outside families that are joining us for this webinar with more information about that. And another option, if you are interested in more of a full-time program that offers, small group lessons and collaboration with a peer community that's led by a Montessori guide, please check out guidepostmontessori.com/EDL for elementary distance learning, and you can read more about the program details and how to apply. But yeah, let's get into some questions. We had a few things that came through. We've got from Janelle: if my son chooses work but isn't engaged with it, he rolls around on the floor and doesn't get focused. Do I suggest that he choose something else? Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. My sense is whenever a child is doing something that we view as undesirable, like rolling on the floor, they're trying to tell us something, usually that they do need a suggestion for how to get involved in their own work. That what they've chosen is not satisfying yet a need. So your instinct to redirect to another piece of work to get them started. Our job is to get them interested in something and to get them started. And certainly if they're rolling around on the floor, I always take a breath to notice and see what my child might be telling me by their actions. But certainly if they persist in rolling on the floor, then they're not yet engaging their energy. He might be telling you that the work that he needs to do is with his body, because that would be my best guess. But my sense is that you can always engage a child who's rolling on the floor and showing you that they need some sort of physical activity as a redirection, with that physical activity as a suggestion.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Peter. I would probably, ask, do you need some kind of break, or do you need some help finding something else to do, and sort of seeing what the child says and go from there. We have a question from Lindsay. She asks, what if I ask my child what he's interested in learning and he says nothing? He's 9.
Well, we've all faced the challenge of when we ask an open-ended question and we get an answer that we weren't expecting, like nothing. My sense is that if we provide 2 choices in that sense, rather than an open-ended question of what are you interested in learning, what about are you interested in learning about, and this is where our preparation comes into play. I said earlier that we make a plan in order to break a plan. If we have ahead of time planned that we want to introduce particular topics, then instead of asking the open-ended question of what would you like to learn, we ask, would you like to learn about plants today or animals? Choose. Whenever we get the I'm not interested in learning about anything, that sort of resistance, it's best to have in our hip pocket 2 choices that create a framework around the idea of too much open-endedness. My instinct is that invitation will usually produce a result more often.
Great. All right, next question. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. When do we transition from mat work to desk work to foster their focus?
I didn't catch the last bit. When do we transition from
mat work? I think meaning, floor work with a mat, to desk work to foster their focus.
My sense is that The reason why we work at different levels throughout the day is because there's a need for the body to actually work in different ways and in different positions in order to satisfy those needs. So at 8 and 11, a child is certainly capable of sitting at a desk, at a chair, at a table to do work. But I would watch and observe, especially with the 8-year-old, to see how often that he might want to be imitating or she might want to be imitating her sibling, and encourage that 11-year-old to definitely have periods of time where they're formally sitting at a table to complete their work. You'll find that a lot of times the imitation comes out and that they'll be working alongside one another in that sense.
I think too, sometimes the work itself will dictate what you're doing. Like if you're doing a larger project that you just spread out for, like a timeline that you mentioned, you would, that would lend itself to doing something on the floor. But if you're practicing something like handwriting, you'd really want to be sitting in a proper chair and, have all that physical support that you need so that you can focus on the work of the hand.
Yeah, I'm so glad, Kelly, that you mentioned the idea that the nature of the work dictates the posture and the way that we would approach it, especially with regard to handwriting, because it's so important to not practice skills that are going to adversely affect the one we're trying to bring forward.
All right, another question. My child doesn't usually go back to work he leaves out. How long should I let him leave it out for?
So this is a great question. If you notice, of course, you've noticed that your child has left work out and doesn't return to it, you'd want to communicate that noticing to your child for sure, because all work in Montessori settings, we think of work as a cycle, which means that once we have worked with it, the final part of that cycle is it has a place where it ends up going so that it can be worked with again later. So the cycle really isn't complete when a child is working with some material until it has been brought to a close. And then asking your child to make a decision about whether they've completed it at least initiates a sense of, okay, and now my responsibility is to put items or pieces of it, if they've been come from different places, or the entire project in a way that away in its place, or bring it to completion.
Yeah. Next question from Mariana. She says, my biggest challenge with my daughter is thinking of things to make school more fun and less of a drag. The example of the artistic child who avoids math resonates because that sounds like my daughter. She's a very kinetic learner and likes working with her hands, but she dislikes stamp game. My brain works differently, so it's challenging thinking of ways to make learning games / hands-on work.
Well, I definitely identify with the idea that it's difficult sometimes when you have the child who seems to be avoiding math work because they would prefer to do art. And certainly I think that the key is to profoundly interest them in something that speaks to the passion that they have. In the absence of a stamp game, I remember one time I had a student myself who was not interested in working with the ready-made stamp game, but certainly was interested in making one of his own. That really got him involved in making it, and I didn't put too many controls on how it was made, so it could be very interpretive. And it ended up that that particular child really decided that the stamp game was something he could work with once he felt like he owned it himself. So there's something to be said for agency and ownership, and trying to appeal to a child in that way if there's resistance. I'm curious what you think, Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, something that came to mind when I read the question was, just trying to incorporate that into other work. So, if your child is working on math, encouraging them to embellish, in between math problems, showing them how to do different kinds of designs and just making that a regular part of any kind of work, not since you've identified that as an interest. Also, I think you had mentioned as one of the possibilities for follow-up work being to create a game. I think that can be a jumping off point for so many things. Like I know children in my class would create games to learn their math facts, but there was a huge artistic element that was part of that. So just finding a way to leverage those interests to work on the areas that your child might have a tendency to avoid. All right, let's see. I know we've got some other great questions here. My child is very interested in geography, but he likes to watch videos about this all day long. He is only 6 years old. He attends a Montessori elementary, and the teacher sends me every week the choice of board. I'm not quite sure what that means, maybe you can clarify. But he barely wants to work on this. He rather just wants to watch his videos on geography and do a program called ST Math. Would you recommend just to let him explore what he's interested in and ignore the rest? Great question, Claudia, thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, especially when today we are concerned about the amount of screen time, especially for younger children. And I'm curious about the passivity of the action versus the active portion of what could be possible, because it's one thing to watch a video and to have that information. If it's presented in a story form, it might be a lot like being told a story or hearing a story. But certainly, I think what we want to do is have children engage actively to complement their learning so that their hands and their bodies are moving to actually bring that learning inside of them. So because he's interested in geography, it sounds like the teacher is suggesting that he do work around map making and labeling, and that he's getting his hand involved in the actual learning suggestion. And my feeling is that you can use videos if you've reviewed them and approved them and feel like they're of high quality as starting points, but they shouldn't be the end goal. They should be just means to get to a place where children are active. And I'm going to have to think about some activities that I might suggest to you to have as follow-up work, but essentially the videos sound like possibilities for starting, but certainly not the end goal.
I wonder if you might watch it with him and have him think about like what are some of the important facts that came from them and write them down, and perhaps there's some illustration work that you could do along with that, or if he's resistant to doing the map work, but there's something that sparked his interest in the video, maybe with that connection you can have better success.
Yeah, sometimes doing something as simple as, and I don't know what aspects of the geography interest him. It could be features of geography like landforms and waterforms. It could be the actual place names that are interesting to him. But memory work around, okay, can you freehand draw or can you freehand make a map yourself and then see how many of those territories, provinces, states, countries you can name and try to write in from memory is a fantastic follow-up activity.
Another one that children in my class really enjoyed was to create a postcard. So when they would learn about a new country and maybe didn't want to write a research report, they would illustrate the front of it with different landmarks and like perhaps clothing that was more popular or native to that area, and then on the back write to a friend in the class and drop it off in their cubby. But you could still do the same with email or perhaps the post if you're working from home.
Oh, that's a great idea.
All right, let's see. What else do we have here? We have a question from Allison. She says, how do we help children with their big emotions? My daughters, ages 7 and 9, sometimes get challenging. Should I let them step away from it for the day and come back to it later, or help them work through their feelings and stick with it?
My sense is that we need to normalize emotions because we all have them. And the most powerful tool we have as a parent, or even as an adult to an adult, is the power of acknowledging and validating. So this idea of seeing, like observing, I see that you're upset right now, and that's okay. It's fine to be upset. So validating that it's okay, but then not necessarily spending an overt amount of time, because a child wants to bring themselves back to being able to self-regulate when they're feeling big emotions. So I think what they need from us is permission that what they're having is normal and valid, but that the expectation, and this is from Peter Levine's work, is that human beings, like any species, have the ability to move through stressors fairly quickly and get back to a place of calm alert. And we need to project that that's possible for our children too, and that in so doing that they can calm themselves, regulate themselves, and get back to that way of focused being and concentration. That would be my best guess. The acknowledge and validation piece is important.
I agree, and I think sometimes we have to work through that, in order to be able to focus. So it's worth taking the time to process that, but not dwell on it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this came actually from the initial question about pain points. We have a parent who says, I feel like I'm making my child choose work versus enticing him to it. He seems to do work just to get it done versus curiosity about the work. Would love more pointers or maybe resources on creating the wonder, what books to read, or even language used to incite curiosity. I hope you were able to answer some of those questions during the webinar, but it seems like something that might be good to elaborate on.
Yeah, and in the webinar, we talked about the flow state, and ironically, the research on it says that it's not always, people who get into flow don't always get there, and children who get into that state of working in concentration don't always get there from having made a free choice. Sometimes they get there from having been given a limited choice. So I wouldn't close the door on the idea. I heard the language of, I feel like I'm making my child do work. Children benefit from structure and knowing where the boundaries are. We're not talking about lack of structure. And I think there's a dance between making sure that your child knows that the expectation is that that you have your work day and they have their work day, and that they're involved in doing their own work, and that the expectation is that they will. But I do sympathize and empathize with the idea that sometimes it feels like we're making, and that doesn't always feel comfortable, especially if we notice that a child is just wanting to get done for the sake of getting done. So my invitation in that case is to keep searching for that particular passion or interest of your child so that you can introduce aspects of what might spark their interest, listening to the questions they ask, paying attention to what they might like, both inside and outside, and then structuring lessons or introductions to things that specifically get at that particular interest as a jumping off point.
And I know that she also asked for some resources, and I was just going to point back to the elementary family framework. We have a section within there, it's a section called topics, but there are a bunch of sample lessons that are refreshed weekly. And if you like what you see, you might also be interested in our Guidepost Elementary album. All right, next question. My daughter is 7 and is very into graphic novels. She only wants to draw comics. Does this mean that she is not grounded or rooted in reality? How can I help her extend work from presentations? I love this question because I had many children in my class that loved graphic novels as well.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to see the appeal of graphic novels since you know, we're used to storyboarding and we're used to the idea of a story unfolding. We're a visual species, so it's easy to see why that's such so appealing. So I wouldn't interpret it as your child is not grounded. Usually we find that children work in a particular way with a particular passion and interest for a long time until they're satiated, and we'll find that they'll move on from thing to thing. I'm not saying it's necessarily because I don't know your child, but I would say that my experience has been that especially children in Montessori settings, but children overall who have been given choices about pursuing passions usually work within them for a period of time that is uniquely satisfying to them and explore all the areas. Our job within that is to create opportunities within that passion to explore all the different areas, subject areas that are possible until they're really satiated. And you'll find that they move on to other things. They won't stay stuck there, trust me.
That's for sure. And I think also, you know, you can indulge that a little bit with extensions. Like you could have 2 comic characters that are discussing or acting out like photosynthesis or even answering math problems. So if you can find a way to sort of give into that for a little bit, I think you'll find what Peter said is true, which is that they won't stick with it forever. So nothing to be concerned about for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's see. Tina asks, might you be able to share any ideas for how to motivate children to work on something that they might not want to? For example, my child does not usually choose to work on writing. Is that okay? How can I encourage the practice of writing? He is 6.
You know, the best way to encourage a practice of something that you see your child is not yet tending to is to go to a table close by where they're working and do it yourself. So if you have a journal or a writing practice, the best way to encourage your child to do it is not to make continued invitations to do something they've shown resistance to, but in fact, to go over near where they're playing or sitting or working and begin to do the thing that you would like them to do yourself, and actually in a way show how satisfying and gratifying it is to you to do it. That usually creates an interest of, I wonder what's going on over there, and then you can share your experience and make a suggestion about how they could do the same. That's my basic approach. I talked about my significant other, and she has a young teenage daughter now who plays volleyball. I wasn't going to go and suggest that she play volleyball with me. Instead, I went outside and started volleying myself and passing myself. And when she noticed, she came out and wanted to play. I know for a fact if I had asked her, she would have refused. So these principles just keep continuing as the things we want our children to do are best served by us showing how wonderful and exciting it is for us to do them. And then they come along for the ride.
Yeah, I think too, you know, depending on the source of the reluctance, you know, you might try introducing your child to calligraphy. It might be a new point of interest, especially if the reluctance is handwriting or if they tend to be more artistic. That can sometimes be effective. Or I've also had with children who might be a little bit more reluctant to write, to have them dictate a story. And, you know, I'll write it down to sort of get those creative juices flowing, and then maybe work to, like, I'll write a paragraph, you'll write a paragraph, to kind of prompt the experience if they're not choosing it themselves.
Yeah. Experience is so valuable.
All right, Holly wrote in, and she says that she has a 5-year-old, so a little younger than elementary probably, a 5-year-old spirited child who has a very strong reaction when he gets frustrated. Any tips how to channel that intense energy for positive purposes?
Yeah, I think the energy that's intense that you're noticing inside the body needs an outlet. Specifically, that's physical generally. I think it goes back to something we already spoke to, is if you notice that there's intense energy is what I'm hearing, that it's usually potential energy in the body that needs an exit point. And so encouraging that in work around the home that is actually of use to you. We always go back to this idea of practical life in that sense, and a 5-year-old certainly can do that. Showing the child how to do things at home that are necessary and that are actually of some use, that that child can take some pride in and concentrate on, that's physical, is usually the best way to resolve those feelings of intensity that you described. I'm curious, Kelly, what you think.
Well, I was going to actually follow up on what you said. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on what you mean by practical life.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you mentioned that. When I say practical life, I mean things inside your home that need doing, that we often think, oh, well, children wouldn't be interested in doing that or wouldn't want to do that, or that we take care of as adults just because it's faster, but that offering opportunities for children to get their physical energy out by doing things that need doing, is like simply like washing tables or windows, or cleaning floors, or sweeping, or knowing how to clean counters or clean up messes, or vacuuming, or even doing laundry. Showing your child how to do laundry is an excellent practical life skill. Those are the things that I'm thinking of. Yeah,
perfect. All right, it looks like we might not have time for more than one more question, so this may be our last one. This parent asks, what should I expect from this age, and how to help my child accomplish those expectations? And unfortunately, I don't know how old the child is. So if you're still on, if you could clarify, but if not, we can try to answer generally.
Yeah. No, I'm just going to interpret what can I expect from a child at this age as our topic of the elementary child. The truth is, we generally underestimate what children are capable of at most ages. And I feel like what you can expect of your child is to keep offering them choices and agency about how they want to pursue real purposeful work. That's the gift we can give them, and to model and show that we also have our own is so important. When we do that, we invite them into a culture of this idea of working, and working for ourselves and for our own purposes, and to learn and to create this love of learning. And I think that our job in providing that expectation is to believe that they can and are capable.
I love how you put that. Thank you so much, Peter. You've really given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure that our audience feels the same way. I did want to mention we have another webinar coming up next Thursday on May 14th, and the title of that is, "But My Elementary Child Isn't Getting Any Work Done, Collaboration and Accountability in At-Home Learning." And that will be with our presenter, Lisa Kathleen, and it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central Time, noon Mountain Time and 11 a.m. Pacific Time. So I'll be sending out information about that in the follow-up email, and we hope that you'll come join us again. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye, Peter.